evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? How are we all doing? Are we having a good time pretending any of this is real? Acting like this new normal isn't the very same normal through which we space lepers have been operating this whole time. It's okay, it can be real and surreal at the same time. Touch my hand! Touch it! Touch it through the screen. We can do this! Can we? Is that still legal? Or has it been banned now, just in case? If words count as violence, that can count as violating social distancing, right? Alright, never mind. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Dr. Randomercam. I am not a doctor, and that is not my name. But this is my job. Namely, flapping my lips noisily in front of a recording device in the hope of highlighting what can be achieved, for better or worse, by flapping one's lips in front of a recording device. I'm doing this particular presentation for the sake of ICMI2020, and I am known for occasionally broaching the subject of MI to the disdain of many, and I will get around to that at some point, and perhaps to some of the other things one can't quite avoid talking about in the year of our Lord 2020. But I'd like to start by attempting to explain that disdain to which I just alluded, and a series of mistakes that might lead to it. Allow me to demonstrate a mistake. A lot of you will already recognize this graph. It describes a phenomenon that was first stipulated over 2 decades ago and entered the greater public conscience about 1 decade ago. It's one of those wry observations that elicits a rather smug smile the first time you hear about it. As such, if I introduced it to you 10 years ago, it might have made a quaint and interesting addition to a conversation or a diatribe. Just like if I said straw man 20 years ago, a lot of people's reaction would be, "Whoa, what do you mean? I don't understand your advanced figurative vocabulary, old blessed one. Please break down your complex intellect so that ragamuffins like myself might strive to levitate to your altitude." But as you may have already deduced, such things do not last. When you introduce a lofty piece of jargon into common parlance, you only have a few years before these smarmy simpletons get hold of it and find themselves shoving it into every hole of every shape in ruthless pursuit of the art of sounding intelligent without ever having to say anything intelligent. Nowadays, when someone says straw man, you can be reasonably suspicious that you're talking to a pretentious moron who is far more interested in using words to cast spells than using them to refine arguments. And alas, the time has come for the same fate to befall this graph and the observation it illustrates. When you hear someone use the term Dunning-Kruger, there is a decent to above average chance that you are dealing with an incompetent and overconfident pretentious moron who has merely grasped at yet another incantation in their pursuit of a quick and easy fix to whatever argument they are losing at the time. It's inevitable. When you think about it, pseudo-intellectual ponces will follow pseudo-intellectual jargon like rats to the piper, round and round the summit of Mount Stupid there. And indeed, the humility one experiences in the nadir of the Great Valley is what prevents us from forming such a claim as "you're incompetent and you don't know it," as though it constitutes a substantive position by itself. In short, mentioning the Dunning-Kruger effect is now a prevalent symptom of the Dunning-Kruger effect itself. It's what I call a homological slur. Unlike an ordinary homological word, it doesn't describe itself as a word, it describes its user. It conclusively indicates a characteristic of whosoever delivers it. By its nature, it comes preloaded with its own "know you." It shoots the hand that writes it. It puts its foot in the mouth of the speaker that speaks it. For instance, To call someone a slanderer is to slander them. To call someone a contrarian invariably is to take up a position contrary to theirs. To call someone a misogynist is typically, if not always, a deeply disrespectful attempt to use women as a combustible weapon in an irrelevant battle of attrition. And indeed, we've reached the point at which straw man is usually employed as a misrepresentation of an argument that was not a misrepresentation, hence it itself is a straw man. And you won't get anywhere by explaining these things post hoc, because pointing out the no you inherent in the system merely comes across as a no you out of the blue, as unsubstantiated as the initial homological slur. As such, what we have here is a mistake. This whole graph, this whole notion, is a fundamental mistake. Not because it's untrue or inaccurate, it may very well not be, but because its usage, its application, has a limited shelf life. After that shelf life is over, it becomes not productive but counterproductive. Much like unrefrigerated foodstuffs, it inevitably goes off. And once it's sufficiently past its sell-by date, it will no longer nourish you. Despite any rudimentary roughage contained in its primordial mould, it will not fill your bowels. It will in fact cause you to void them from both ends. Much like the term straw man, the term Dunning-Kruger used to be what we might call food for thought, but now it is only food for the projectile vomiting of thought. We are dealing, probably apocryphally, with one of the two things that Albert Einstein probably sarcastically proclaimed to be infinite. Indeed, evidence for the universe's infinity is still scant compared with evidence for the infinity of human stupidity. The eternity of stupidity we can produce cannot be encapsulated by mere words or sounds or pictures or even abstract signs. What I mean is, it is not possible, neither mathematically nor biologically nor psychologically, to pinpoint any specific reason that explains any given manifestation of human arrogance, let alone the condition as a whole. It will always surprise you. It will always find a way to surpass even your wildest expectations, no matter what you do or how comprehensively you prepare for it. There is no why. It simply is. And I know that sounds unfalsifiable. Therein is the paradox. It is the description of the unfalsifiability inherent in the system we refer to as human stupidity. What we can do is make some attempt to plot why. Well, not why, but how. We can try to study the relationship human beings have with ideas. I've always preferred to focus on ideas rather than the people having them, not least because ideas are not infinitely stupid, because their self-replication requires transient memory. Ideas can be extremely stupid, sometimes objectively stupid, but they cannot propagate infinitely without some kind of mind or some kind of collective cognitive bias of minds helping them to do so. And the interesting thing about ideas and how they relate to the humans harboring them, or at least the thing that might remain interesting for a few years before it goes horribly wrong, is they are subject to a similar phenomenon that can be plotted in a similar graph, similar at a cursory glance. As before, let us plot confidence on the y-axis, representing the confidence one is likely to have in a given idea. Competence, however, not quite as applicable to the ideas, since ideas don't really do any work. They don't do any of the working out, so to speak, or any of the heavy lifting, so to speak, in another metaphorical avenue. The only way to measure ideas is by the feedback they receive from their empirical application in the world. the causal connections that can be drawn between them and the consequences for which they, as ideas, can be held accountable. So, for the sake of symmetry, what we're going to do is we're going to plot on the x-axis is negative feedback. One might intuitively use positive feedback, as is traditional, but negative will be the most illustrative option in terms of narrative, as you'll see. If an idea receives little to no negative feedback, moreover, it can only be seen to receive positive feedback, then it naturally resides high up on the y-axis, where one's confidence in that idea is elevated and robust. Ideas such as breathing air, metabolizing food, supporting your family, that sort of thing. But the problem is, the ideas to which we cling most stubbornly are the best ones and the worst ones. Positive feedback builds confidence because of its harmonious nature with the environment, but negative feedback builds confidence because it travels along a sort of a closed loop in the human mind, or indeed any mind capable of remembering any idea. Once you're above a positive threshold with a prosperous and felicitous idea, it becomes fantastical to even consider abandoning it. And once you're above a certain negative threshold with a cruel and irrational idea, it becomes increasingly impossible to admit just how cruel and irrational you've been. Like if I said to you, we're going to spend billions of dollars on an international race war to hold the free world hostage until it relinquishes power to a criminal dynasty of obscenely wealthy paedophiles, you wouldn't in your wildest dreams think, yes, count me in, sign me up, shut up and take my money, that is definitely how you be the good guys. But, as bizarre as that sounds, friends, I know, as absolutely indescribable as that deigns to imagine, it, of course, does not mean it's impossible to get there. All you need is increments. With enough increments, you can indeed build a lever that can move the earth. Lever, if you prefer. If I said to you, we're going to kill more black people in one summer than the police have killed in 35 years, you might not be on board with that idea. But if I said to you, let's avenge the death of a black man, great. Protest in the streets over it? Yeah, sure, why not? Even though there's a lockdown going on? Yeah, it probably doesn't matter. Whoops, a lot of our protesters are carrying out violently deadly riots and lootings. Wait, what? Am I partially responsible for that? Yeah, no, there probably aren't any riots. We need to lie through our teeth that the people we're explicitly trying to oppress are actually the ones doing the oppressive rioting? Well, that's obviously not even happening. All we're doing is avenging a black man's death. I remember. We killed scores of black people. Censor! Cancel. Nothing means anything anymore. Shut it down. Like, if you don't want kids taking drugs, that's a good idea. So you ban drugs. A generation or two later, everyone's taking way more drugs than before, especially kids, and countless people are in prison for victimless crimes. Do you end the drug war? When it becomes definitively clear that it has not just failed but made the problem worse. Do you bite the bullet and go back the way you came? God, no. That would be to admit how royally you screwed everything up for everyone. So you carry on arresting and shooting people, and you just blame it all on whiteness or something. You don't abandon the old unbelievably bad idea. You just plaster another unbelievably bad idea over the top of it, and then never abandon that either. And that's what I intend to illustrate by plotting essentially the same graph as the Dunning-Kruger effect, but horizontally flipped and conceptually extruded. This is what ideas are exhibiting while human beings are exhibiting the Dunning-Kruger effect. I call it the Cunning do-gooder effect, just because it's funny. As we all know, well, not all of us in our right minds, but as anyone can ascertain if they're feeling lucid, nobody who is in the business of governing peoples, nobody sincerely runs on a platform of let's kill all humans and end civilization. Nobody actually conspires to do this, even if they want to, deep down. That's not how optics works when you're dealing with a social species. We're dealing with something that transcends people and transcends their agendas, individually or collectively. It's an organic process within that framework that we are able to observe as it evolves. It's less like an object and more like a hole in the Overton window, as it's often called. It can start with what seems like an unassailably good idea and ends with what seems like an indefensibly bad idea. For a more detailed and perhaps pertinent example, stage 1, protect women. Obviously a good idea. If you've any interest in maintaining the family or indeed the species, it's a good idea to protect each other. This most definitely includes women, not least since they are the reproductive bottleneck to this thing we call maintenance. It's not just logical, it's biological. Next stage, the protection of women should be enshrined in law. I suppose if law is a thing and stage 1 is a thing, it would make some sense that they would be a thing together. The law seems to make the occasional mistake, but that's probably to be expected. Next stage, protecting men is contrary to protecting women, therefore is immoral. Well, it kind of sounds like a zero-sum game, but the reproductive bottleneck is still a factor, so maybe. Next stage. To advocate for men's rights is to advocate against women's rights, therefore it should be a hate crime. Well, it seems arguing against this clause would be illegal according to this clause, and I'd really rather not do anything illegal. Next stage. Masculinity is pathological and needs to be socialized out of us at an early age. Well, effectively, we've already started doing that, so clearly it is possible. Next stage, kill all men. Well, this is clearly just a joke. Stop being so fragile. Next stage, kill all men. This is not a joke. Well, men killed women first, so it's only fair. Next stage, there is no next stage. We just killed the species. This is what the drop-off represents. The sudden sharp plummet that turns an ordinary Chelsea smile into a scene from a Hannibal Lecter movie. Confidence is something that you can hold on to until the last dying breath of your civilization, but not a moment longer. Indeed, just before the death of the very last non-binary post-genital woman on Earth, she will probably look up at the stars and shake her fist and say, "This is all men's fault." It's a slow boil, relatively speaking, at least relative to evolution, but it starts with keep humans alive, and before you know it, you've got all the way to kill humans dead. All because of that tiny grain of biologically normal gynocentrism, snowballing rapidly as it tumbles unchecked down the hill. A little bit like a sort of brachistochrone curve, but with this mysterious attractive force at the other end that pulls it all the way up. And when you reach the dark end, you're at the stage where you're not just being indescribably cruel to a targeted genetic group, you're being indescribably cruel to anyone who isn't being indescribably cruel enough to that group, or anyone who even suggests that this is cruel. and might not be a 100% morally perfect idea. You need to do this in order to keep that belief going. Now that there's more negative feedback than positive feedback, you have to generate your own negative feedback. That's where you get very emotional and very acerbic. And it's obviously exhausting, keeping it all up. Now you have to insult people and tell yourself you're righteous for doing it. And that's already difficult to admit having done once you've started doing it. Where you used to meet challenges with a steadied hand, you find yourself resorting more and more to sheer anger and frustration, and bizarre conduits of language where everything becomes rather deformed, and even 2 + 2 = 4 is politically incorrect. As if politically incorrect wasn't already a nonsensical way of describing anything. This is where you have what we call a belief that you cannot be reasoned out of, even if you were indeed reasoned into it. At this stage, there is only one thing that can bring you out of it, and it's the petard of your own selective memory, which is itself generally a working component of the Cunning-do-gooder effect. If it's left long enough, and everyone else around you abandons that idea, and it becomes indisputable that the whole thing is a catastrophic failure, you might find yourself conveniently forgetting that you ever believed it. I never thought feminism's just about equality. I never thought communism's just about sharing. I didn't believe the government. I never believed the government. Only idiots would do that. Yeah, look at those idiots. They're not me. When you're that far gone, the only thing that can save you from the black hole is the memory hole. You might already have no idea how much unforgivable stuff you've done in your life that you simply don't remember, simply because you'd rather not. It's not quite like PTSD. It is a defense mechanism, but it's a very slow one. If you have a memory of being abused, the mind can block it out rather quickly. But if you have a memory of you being the abuser, the mind can block that out too, but it takes a long time, possibly years, and only after it even occurs to you that you were the abuser, that you were not in fact doing the right thing. And what's more, what's all the more sinister, there is an event horizon, a fever pitch you can reach, where the anger with which you respond to challenges is so impulsive and so dismissive that it firewalls any possibility of contradictory information, nor will it ever let you forget. The very notion that this idea has any negative consequences at all will only be shot on sight if it gets anywhere near your brain. If your protests have killed far more people than the thing you're protesting ever did, it's indefensible. By first principles, by the standard of the original foundation of the idea, it has failed. If your so-called social commentary about exploitation is flagrantly exploiting those very same exploitees, by your own standards, you are the villain you're supposed to be fighting against. But you'll never be able to admit to that. This cannot be true. It's not possible. Nobody can be that unimaginably evil and or stupid, especially not me. Like when a series of websites told you to believe you were killing people by going outside. Yes, millennials, I'm going to talk to you like the boomers you obviously are, and to you that probably somehow makes sense, and that's kind of the point. Shut up. Focus for a second. You woke up one day, and a loosely connected network of incentivized quote-unquote reporters told you everyone is going to die, and you believed them. And now your entire way of life has been arse-ended at the swipe of some dark emperor's dagger. Don't act like it hasn't. And what are you doing? What are you doing in response to that happening? You're brutally cucking yourself to own the covitards. You're inventing silly, insulting names with which to subcategorize other loosely connected networks of incentivized quote-unquote reporters who presented a quote-unquote different report. Not because that report was untrue, but because it's a different report. You're pointing at those reports and going, look, someone disagrees with us. Aren't they dumb? I can't figure out why they're wrong, but come, let us laugh at the losers who think the wrong thing. You're standing in a barren digital wilderness, periodically crowing at the sight of a bad take, instead of ever giving the first hoot about the livelihood you just lost for no good reason. The livelihood everyone just lost. Everyone except the giant corporations telling you what to believe. That's what you're doing. I mean, good Lord. This is not even nothing. This is dark energy. You would not believe the sheer forces of cognitive gravity at play here. Once you're standing up at the summit of Mount Woke, that cognitive gravity has more control over you than physical gravity. And you would sooner stop believing in the theory of physical gravity than stop believing in the dark forces of this insidious idea. And this is where, in a way, it's right to say that it should all come down to the principle, yet it's also right to say we should subject these capricious lawmakers to the consequences of their own capricious laws, or else they will never learn. All of this could be true, but there is a further subsection of these patients who cannot even learn. Full stop. No matter how many rude awakenings they get, no matter how many holes they shoot into their own foot, no matter how much evidence is stacked up before their very eyes, even when the authorities in question admit to the lie, you will still believe the lie. No learning will occur, ever. Learning is no longer supported in this version. Please install upgrade. Some people are actually gone. They cannot come back. Like the parents who never even heard the screams of their newborn child as the surgeon amputated the tip of his genital skin and harvested it to the highest bidder. It is impossible to come to terms with that. And so, from that machine spews nothing but impossible terms forever. I cannot possibly have done this. To my child, I cannot possibly have done this. I would rather die. I'd rather bury myself right here by God than have done this. And they're right. They can't live with it. Could you? They literally can't accept this reality and go on living. For this life would be as good as over. Just like families all over the world have been isolated and left to die alone. And workers and small businesses have been scraped away from the landscape like a hurricane just plowed through everything, leaving nothing but government-approved riots. For no good reason, the world was turned into a totalitarian ghost town overnight, and all you did was oink for more and grunt incessantly at the now poverty-stricken plebs whose lives you were complicit in ruining. How can you ever come back from that? How can you face your fellow man when you've spat in all their faces like that? You can't. You have to keep telling yourself forever that they deserved it. Because they're stupid and you're smart and their science is bad science and your science is good science. And really, you have to be prepared to account for the existence of people like this. Or should I say, the persistence of ideas like this. I myself, through a certain flighty optimism, have occasionally leaned on the idea that everything's mysteriously going to drain back to normality after November. Obviously, that's a case that's easier to make for the United States than it is for the rest of the world where it's going on. And even so, some things will not go back to normal. Certainly not right away. I mean, perhaps the bribes will dry up. Perhaps the conditions of the bribes will come to an end. Perhaps the government, out of pure necessity, will have to stop choking the life out of its battery farm citizens, lest the source of all their energy ceases to be a ruthless psychopath or an artificially intelligent machine, can change their mind surprisingly easily, because the bottom line is self-preservation of life, not just self-preservation of ego. However, ordinary people with ordinary egos and ordinary uncertainties about the world can have enormous difficulties admitting they were wrong. It's hard enough admitting that you yourself came up with an idea that turned out to be a terrible idea. In many ways, it's even harder to admit that you were convinced by someone else's terrible idea. Because then you really have let yourself down as well. You have to admit it to yourself, not just vie for the approval of others. You weren't just foolish, you were passively foolish. You let your guard down on purpose. You volunteered yourself to the slaughter. And you signed everyone else up for it. So in conclusion, if you want the people way up there to come down from their high horse at the tip of Mount Woke, forget it. It's not going to happen. Ever. That's the event horizon. No force in the universe can fight it. If you want to coax down the people who are almost there, also don't bother. Because as I said, only the memory hole can coax them down. They'll only stop believing this when they no longer remember believing it. If 2 years from now you say, hey, remember the lockdown hoax of 2020? Remember when you callously betrayed your species above and beyond all reason because the media told you to? Remember that! If you tell them that, all you'll do is push them back up the mountain. Because now they remember. Now they have to rationalize that memory somehow, and they'll do so the only way they know how. By quintupling down on that same apocalyptic idea. So, just let them forget. Give them all the time they need to pretend it was all other people's fault. We absolutely must not let the world at large forget what happened here, so we can say no next time anyone proposes it. But we can do so without pointing the finger at our friends and family. Point your finger at the thing that happened. Maybe 5-10 years from now, we can agree on some kind of story. Like it was just the authorities being authoritarian as they do. None of us fell for it. No. It was all Trump's fault. I think, and that's you know it's still a blatant lie, but that sort of thing might be the only way we'll ever get our friends back from the black hole at the top of the mountain. So yeah, patience, brothers and sisters. Be gentle with the infected. They're going to be very sensitive and volatile for some time, and in some cases, forever. As such, this graph, the information I've constructed for you, is dangerous information. Because once you understand that this is how the system works, you are able to abuse it. Much like telling someone how easy it is to start wildfires, or how to build a bomb, it may be dangerous information, but it's also potentially useful information, because it might help explain what's going on, and maybe even lead to its curtailing in some way. However, as I said earlier, we're already long past any theoretical point at which mentioning the Dunning-Kruger effect is at all likely to change anyone's ways, and make them go, oh yeah, I see now, I'll be less blindly overconfident in future. Not going to happen. You won't be giving them a life lesson, you'll only be giving them ammunition to keep firing in the same direction. I'm not Dunning-Krugering, you are! So making a meme out of the Cunning do-gooder effect will not work either. It will just run aground in the same way. So don't bother, honestly. Bear it in mind. Bear in mind how it works, by all means, but don't go thinking you'll get through to anyone by saying, oh, that's a proper bit of a Cunning do-gooder right there, my friend. Boy, you really need to shape up. You really need to get with it. It's not going to happen. again, all you will do is push them further up the mountain, because it'll just jog their memory when the only helpful thing they can do is forget. Hey, maybe the most helpful thing you can do with the cunning do-gooder effect is forget it. Consciously, anyway. Maybe it's the kind of thing that's best left up to the subconscious. Maybe the safest and most prudent thing to remember is simply some kind of vague moral sentiment that confidence is not necessarily a universal good. Confidence is a two-sided coin. One side keeps us in essential habits. The other side is poised to choke us all to death at any given opportunity. Beware confidence. If you want to build it, try building it using facts and reliable statistics and graphs that plot something that you even measured. Not just made up rhetorical devices like this gobbledygook I've been showing you. Have the confidence, friends, to doubt your own confidence. And by all means, trust people. Trust some people some of the time. Life is much better when you have people you can trust. But never, friends, never trust an idea. No matter how good it seems in your head, it's just an idea. It's just a virus. It doesn't care about you. And the machine network of abstractions it builds between people doesn't care about those people. Don't put any degree of care into a machine that doesn't care about you. It's just a black hole, just a dead piece of the universe. You create the black hole by throwing your care into it, by throwing your trust into it, by throwing your confidence into it. So yeah, don't trust this idea. This idea will also eat you, given half the chance. Don't trust anything I'm saying. Don't trust anything I've ever said. You don't know me. You don't have to live with me. To you, I am just... That's right, an idea. Thank you very much for listening to the show. And listening to the slow, boring self-destruction of this rather dodgy and vacuous idea. Do your best to forget everything I've just said, and indeed everything I've ever said. Your subconscious will do the rest. I've been Dr. Randomercam. No, I have not. Goodbye, and be happy for as long as such an idea can last. Enjoy your lives, friends, if you feel like it.